A quick announcement before the show is that our next event in Talking San Diego will be this Wednesday, May 15th at 7 p.m. at University of San Diego's Shiley Theater. I will be in conversation with author, MSNBC anchor, and former White House press secretary Jen Psaki. There are only a very few tickets left, and I apologize if when you click on the link, if you try it, if there is a sellout, you would still be able to get a signed copy of Jen's new book, and there may be still a few seats around. So give it a try and hope to see you there. Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. Quite a lot happened this week in courts, the campaign trail, campuses, and around the world. But the epicenter of focus and activity was again the somewhat dilapidated Courtroom 1530 in 100 Center Street, the New York Criminal Courts building, where New York versus Trump had its third week. The highlight of the week was testimony from Stormy Daniels, which spanned 2 court days. The consensus among observers was that Daniels gave a credible account of a sexual encounter with Donald Trump and its aftermath. While it's not necessary to his defense, Trump has steadfastly denied that the encounter even happened, setting up a high-stakes credibility battle when the jury deliberates. Plenty of other action filled the 4 days of trial. Justice Juan Merchan remained a steady but forceful presence, and a few of his legal rulings have shaped the contours of the case and a possible appeal if Trump is convicted. A slower court day followed Stormy Daniels' testimony Friday, and court let out early, with anticipation intense about the appearance Monday of star witness Michael Cohen, after which the prosecution says it will present at most one more witness before resting its case. I was again crazy fortunate to be able to be in the courtroom all week, and because not many people are, and because this jury looks increasingly likely to be the only one that will pass judgment on the conduct of Donald Trump before the November 2024 election, we are devoting this week to an in-depth, nuanced look at the trial by 3 great analysts who also were in court this week and bring different specialties to bear on the question of how the trial is going and what the prosecution needs to do to seal the deal. And they are Jon Alter, an award-winning author, filmmaker, columnist, and MSNBC political analyst. He's the author of 5 political and historical books. In 2021, he launched a newsletter and Substack, Old Goats, Ruminating with Friends, and he is covering the trial for the New York Times opinion section. Thanks very much for being here, Jon. I think you've been in the court every day.
I have. So I'm writing, just for clarity, I'm writing a short piece or 2 every day for the New York Times opinion section. And then I'm writing a quite long piece for Old Goats and the Washington Monthly magazine for people who are real junkies. I'm doing like 2,500 or 3,000 words a day.
All right. I do think the junkie factor has skyrocketed in the last few weeks. Next, Kristy Greenberg, a first-time guest to Talking Feds. That's always a pleasure for me to say. A legal analyst at MSNBC and the former deputy chief of the criminal division for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the vaunted Southern District of New York. Thanks so much, Kristy, for joining us on Talking Feds this historic week.
Thanks for having me.
And Danny Cevallos, an MSNBC legal analyst, the co-founder of Cevallos and Wong LLP. Very importantly, a defense attorney with a defense perspective. Cevallos and Wong is a Philadelphia-based law, criminal defense, and civil litigation law firm. Danny, thanks so much for joining.
Harry, thank you for having me on a podcast by and for federal prosecutors. I feel honored, much like Joe Pesci's character in Goodfellas felt honored to be invited to that meeting at which he was going to be a made man. And I feel honored the way Fredo Corleone felt honored and thrilled to go fishing at the end of Godfather 2. This is an honor, Harry. I am so glad to be here and very much looking forward to it.
Me too. We won't give you the omerta kiss that Al Pacino puts on his lips, but you never know what is inside the door. I just want to say, since you've mentioned it, that Pesci moment, just, the nanosecond before the bullet goes in when he realizes what's going on. I don't know how you would spell that exactly, but that kind of, the quick equivalent of, oh shit, which is the last thing he says.
I'm feeling it now.
All right. So I think we should start with Stormy Daniels' testimony. And it's a great thing to have you, Dana, because I think we're going to have some difference of opinion, which is totally what happens when trial lawyers talk about trials, and don't let anybody tell you different. In fact, it's the reason really that we started this podcast. Let's just start with whether you found her and you believe the jury found her credible overall.
Well, I would just say a big yes. The courtroom is just one of, dozens in that building at 100 Center Street, Manhattan Criminal Courthouse. And every day you have lowlifes who are huge liars and completely distrusted by juries who convict based on what the liars testify to, because they believe that in the particular case where they're on the jury and the particular facts that they're considering, the liar who is testifying is telling the truth about those issues. And that's what I think is happening here, and why the efforts to discredit any of these witnesses is pretty much falling short, because they've given the jury a permission slip to distrust the witnesses but believe them. And I think in Stormy Daniels' case, she was actually better on cross than she was on direct. On direct, she seemed like she was telling a kind of a canned story, which she had told many times before.
Kind of quickly, nervously.
It was TMI. She was, oversharing. The judge admonished her for oversharing, which hurt her on direct. But that oversharing, ironically, all of those details that the judge admonished her to avoid contributed to her credibility. Because as she said at one point, to laughter, stifled laughter from the jury. If I was making this up as a writer, she's also a screenwriter in addition to an actress and director. If I was making up this story, it would have been a better story. I'm telling the truth, so it's a little messy. And that was very effective with the jury.
So I think it was important. We heard from defense in opening. They started out by saying she's a liar and this encounter never happened. I don't think the jury is going to buy that. Even if you're listening to Fox News, they're buying that it happened and they're just saying that he's some kind of a stud, which is not what her testimony was. But I think everybody believes that they had a sexual encounter. But the defense oddly opened the door to this. So, and then we heard her story and we heard those details and we heard exactly why Donald Trump wanted to make sure that Stormy Daniels got paid for her silence. I mean, Donald Trump didn't want America to hear these kind of details, him showing up in his Hugh Hefner satin pajama pants, hearing the detail that he doesn't sleep in the same room as Melania, and the really creepy detail that he said that she reminded him of his daughter as he was trying to use the spot on The Apprentice to get her to sleep with him. I mean, all of it was creepy, dirty old man, just awful. And I think he would not have wanted that out before the election, especially after that Access Hollywood tape dropped. And that's when they really were interested in making the payment. So I think all of that was very effective. I will say that I agree completely. She did much better on cross than she did on direct. I mean, some of the areas that the cross-examination went into really seemed unnecessary, and also seemed to assume that the encounter happened. And I thought that a lot of it, like the line of "you have a lot of experience making phony stories about sex." And her response was, the sex in the films is actually very real. And just like what happened to me in that room. And it was really Stormy Daniels. Her back was up against the wall. She was really getting hit hard on cross. And I felt like she gave as good as she got there. So I didn't feel like that on the cross was really successful at all. If anything, I think, particularly for the women in the jury, her kind of looking to shame her. You're a porn star, and so this is what you should expect to have happen, people making passes at you. And of course, you're open to having sex. I mean, that was gross. And I really don't think that would play well with the jury.
So, Danny, I want your general thoughts, which I think are somewhat different, which is great. But let me zero in on 2 points that Jon and Kristy have made. One, the notion that the defense had made such a big deal of it in opening and greatly increased the stakes of the credibility battle in a way that's wasn't necessary to the charges. And two, the idea that Stormy was better on cross-examination, which is I take as an implicit criticism of Nichols. Give us all your thoughts, but especially focus on those two, given your defense experience.
Yes, I think the defense opened the door. I agree they opened the door in their opening and made an issue out of something that probably shouldn't have been an issue. I think it changes the calculus completely, and Justice Merchan pointed that out. I think Stormy Daniels was damaging to Donald Trump, but the damage she did also represents the first possibly major appealable issue, one that Judge Merchan himself on the record said, hey, this may have gone too far, but it's not enough for a mistrial. So I guess the question I pose is that if Stormy Daniels' testimony represents the first appealable issue because it's problematic, and if you could have gotten all of that evidence, most of it at least, from some other source, and I think they did mostly, and maybe I'm missing something, but I think the details of the transaction of Cohen to Stormy Daniels was established through other witnesses and documents. In fact, I think that's proven beyond a reasonable doubt. I think the fact that Stormy Daniels heard the value of her story increased as it got closer to the election, I think they got that from other sources. If you say that the defense opened the door to sex, whether they did or didn't have sex, then I guess, fine, you put Stormy Daniels on. But if Stormy Daniels, 2 years from now, when the appellate division hears this case, if there's a conviction, and they decide that this was overreach and the conviction should be overturned, then Stormy Daniels will have been an unnecessary risk. Look, in terms of witnesses, she wasn't the worst, but I don't think she testified well. But I want to caveat that because I'm one of the only people here that wasn't in the courtroom on the day she testified. So I'm largely going by dispatches from the courtroom, some of which, as you've seen, can be pretty close transcriptions. But I mean, look, there are two ways of looking at this. Did Stormy Daniels successfully zing Susan Nichols? Yeah, a few times. And sometimes that can be really effective. It's happened to me where a particularly, I guess, a cooperating witness who's, kind of a scoundrel but likable, I've gotten zinged and it works and it makes him likable to the jury. But the sense I got from Stormy Daniels is she was that witness that was going to refuse to answer yes or no to a leading question, no matter what. For example, when asked the question, after your book, did you go on the Make America Horny Again tour? There are two answers to that question. Either yes, I did go on the Make America Horny Again tour, or no, I didn't. Her answer was something to the effect of, I never wanted that name for the tour. I fought against the name for that tour. Look, is it effective? I don't know. I mean, from a strictly rules of evidence standpoint, it's not answering the question. It's answering a question, just not the question. Did it end up being effective? Maybe. And I wasn't in the courtroom, so I couldn't really gauge whether she was getting over on Susan Nichols. But I do agree the defense focused on her credibility, I think, too much, because in my view, who cares if they had sex?
I see your point. She's a smart person, and you could see her saying correct, yes, yes, for the most part, and then being wary, I think, a little bit too much. She didn't fight everything or even most things, but you're right, she tried to do things with quips. I just want to ask, do we have three people who all believe that the jury will believe the basic story that the encounter happened? And that is an implicit answer to you, Danny, because if they have made a big deal of it, and if the jury, believes starting out with, so rejects a fundamental axiom that Trump didn't need to bring. I think that was the unnecessary blunder. Trump didn't need to make it a big issue. I've heard 3 votes that the jury will be persuaded the encounter and sex happened. Do I hear that right?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I think when they get in the room, they'll say, Well, we're not sure we believe that she was that surprised when she came out of the
Right.
bathroom. Like she wasn't born yesterday, right? That was very clear from the testimony. But what really sealed it for me, that the jury will think she was there, was the black and white foyer tile. Okay, so very early on, when she started talking about the black and white foyer tile, the judge said, this is just too much detail. So that implants that tile in her head. And then Necklace makes, I think, was a huge mistake, which is when Stormy Daniels is talking about the decor in the hotel suite with great specificity, which suggested that she actually was in that suite. And once you get her in that suite, not believing any sex took place is really hard, right? So Necklace realizes that she's got her in the suite and she's trying to discredit what she saw. And so she says, and you saw a table with flowers on it. You testified on direct, and big wooden table, and you saw a tile, black and white tile. And the witness says, yes. At that point, I was expecting Stormy to get blown out of the water because I was expecting that Necklace would introduce an exhibit with a photograph of the tile, and it was, orange and brown, not black and white, or some construction records to show that that's not how they decorated the penthouse. Then she would have been done as a witness. But Necklace didn't have it. So clearly the tile was black and white, and she saw the tile, and she was in the suite.
All right. So, Kristy, let me go to you because I'm wondering about the picture and even if they've changed it, the construction records, there must be a fact of the matter that can be proven. Why doesn't the DA know one way or another?
I mean, the account is in the record and they didn't dispute it on cross. So I'm not sure the state really needs to belabor that point. I actually agree with Danny's point about some of the details creating an issue for appeal. So again, I thought details were useful to the extent, yes, some of it may be a little embarrassing or cringeworthy, but I was less concerned about that. The details that bothered me were the details where it appeared that it was close to the line of a sexual assault. Any suggestion whatsoever that this was not consensual would be a huge red flag for appeal because that would be far more prejudicial than probative for this case. It's a falsified business records case. Any suggestion that he assaulted her would be far more serious. You don't want any suggestion that a jury would convict him because they didn't like the fact that they believed that he sexually assaulted her. Like that would be completely improper. And there were certain details, and really, I put this on the prosecutor because it wasn't just Stormy going rogue. The prosecutor was eliciting a lot of these questions about the height difference, for example, and about why you didn't say no. Those were not questions that needed to be asked to get out the fact that this encounter happened and to provide enough details to make her credible. That said, defense attorney, crickets. They didn't say anything. They were not objecting to these questions. Like I was sitting in the courtroom like, object, object, object. What are you doing? And when you don't object, you're waiving the issue on appeal. And Judge Mershon hammered them on that and said at one point, I had to object because you weren't, and you should have been objecting.
Danny, you just threw up your hands at that. You're thinking defense 101, what's going on?
I hate being critical of defense counsel because I know the defense counsel is very talented, but I am as mystified as Kristy as to why there aren't more objections in this case, especially with a client. And this shouldn't govern how you do this, but this is a client that obviously I'm sure is telling them to object to everything. But I am mystified. I feel like I'm missing something sometimes when I hear about this stuff coming in. And obviously, I'm not alone because even the judge said on the record, I don't know why you're not objecting. And you would think that would spur them to now be objecting all the time. But I was in court on Friday and I didn't hear a whole lot more. I'm just very confused as to why there weren't near constant objections to this Stormy Daniels testimony. I see no downside. Sometimes you don't object because you don't want to look like you're, fighting too hard or hiding something. But that wasn't one of those moments. This was really damaging testimony. And I just don't know why they weren't jumping up and objecting. I'm with Kristy 100%. And it's so helpful for me to hear that people in the courtroom that day were thinking the same thing. Because again, that was a day I wasn't there. I have to rely on transcripts and what I read. But man, I found myself saying the same thing. Why aren't they objecting? And just sort of assuming I was missing something.
And what Merchan said, because you brought up the issue on appeal and what it would technically be, is that he should have granted a mistrial. And what he said, it wasn't simply you didn't object enough. He did also say these messy details, because you opened the door in your opening argument, the messy details go to her credibility. There was a distinction between messy details like all the atmosphere in the room, which got elaborate and might have been in another instance TMI, as Jon is saying, and messy details about the sex itself. As to that, I don't know. The transcript will show. The DA said it was just 8 questions. It was mainly yes or no. Those 8 questions, of course, tend to loom large in our memory, and maybe they will for the appellate division as well. Let's everyone have a quick final thought about Stormy, and then we got to move on.
So I was just going to say, I don't care what happens on appeal because it can't be appealed until after the election. Trump, probably knowing him, thinks it can be appealed, but it can't. And the only reason this case matters at all is to prevent a convicted felon from being elected president of the United States. And you know what happens to what will be a minimal sentence, or given Merchan's already stated attitude about how he doesn't think putting a president in prison is very logistically workable, I think the odds are he won't get jail time anyway. So this is all about conviction. And when Todd Blanche said you can't unring that bell, he was completely right. And I get the sense that for whatever reason, they may not have been Susan Necklace, if you know something about her history within this case, which is that she hasn't signed several of the motions because she wants to maintain her reputation in the New York bar. And there is very bad blood now between Necklace and her client, which I've heard from various sources. And even last year, it started really last year when she represented Alan Weisselberg in the case where he was stealing from the company, and she lost the case. And Trump said to her, quote, "You're a loser, Susan," which is his biggest insult, which is saying something given his level of insults. And she said, "No, Mr. Trump, I didn't lose that case. Alan Weisselberg lost that case. And don't call me a loser again." And it was apparently very, very, very confrontational. And from what I've heard, she has very little contact with her client. She's not off the case yet, but he had to be really pissed at her the other night. And I wouldn't be surprised if Emile Beauvais does most of the rest of the cross.
Super interesting. I am a lawyer, but that's the kind of stuff we don't get as lawyers. So God bless you, Jon Alter. Okay, other thoughts, final thoughts about Stormy, either Kristy or Danny?
Can I just say one last thing on the mistrial? I actually think that the issue that I was really concerned about on direct, again, these details that seem close to the line of sexual assault that seem like they should not have been said, it actually got cleaned up, I think, on cross by Susan Necklace. She had a question. His actions made you feel like you had to have sex with him? And Stormy Daniels said, no, my own insecurities are what made me feel like I had to have sex with him. He didn't put his hands on me. He didn't give me drugs and alcohol. There was no weapon. He didn't threaten me. And she kind of cleans it up. And she was so clear in the way that it came across that I thought, wow, the defense attorney actually seems to have, shot themselves in the foot here by not being able to point to a very clear transcript where there may be confusion. Stormy Daniels cleaned it up on cross. So I think they'll still appeal it. I agree with Danny 100%. This is an appellate issue, but it is not as strong an appellate issue because of the cross-examination and how Stormy responded.
Great point.
Yeah, and just lastly, I'll say the agony of deciding how to handle a witness like Stormy Daniels, I have sympathy for the defense because she is a minefield. And on the one hand, they felt they had to go after her. I don't know that they should have kept her up there that long because just like Kristy said, they started stepping on landmines. And man, there is nothing more agonizing as defense counsel to have things going your way and then just open the door or make a mistake on cross. I mean, it's every incentive to leave a witness up there as short as you can. And maybe that's what they should have done with Stormy. I hate to second guess, but I mean, the longer they had her up there, I get that they wanted to make her look less than credible, but what was the net takeaway? All right, so she's not credible about sex or not sex. It almost was a trap, it felt like, that the prosecution laid by leaving her up there for the defense. And I feel like the defense kind of took the bait. And to some degree, I mean, Stormy apparently zinged them and came off looking good. I still stand by technically. I think she came off sometimes like an evasive witness, but I wasn't in there. And maybe the way she handled cross-examination went well for her. One
thing on that point, Danny's great point there. So George Conway, everybody knows who he is, on the way to the bathroom, we're treated like inmates in the courthouse.
Yes.
Have permission to go to the bathroom. But the bathroom has no mirrors in case, somebody tries to slash somebody. There's graffiti on the wastebaskets. Anyway, on the way to the bathroom, right after cross, George said to me, and I think he was absolutely right, this should have been an My Cousin Vinny moment. They should have just started cross and said, did you ever have any contact with Donald Trump about business records? Do you have any knowledge at all of Donald Trump's role in the non-disclosure agreement? No, and that's it.
And then sit down.
That would have been an interesting approach. Instead, they went with a kind of a lame cross-examination 101.
The one point I thought she landed, I agree with you, that would have been clean. The one point that I thought she landed, I'd be curious if Danny agrees that this would have been the way to go, was that money was the motive. The parts where she was evasive were the parts where she was admitting that money was a motivating factor for her. Like the book, the strip club, the reality show, the documentary. She kept saying, well, this is more about my life. This isn't just this. And I was motivated to take the payment because of fear for my family. And then I wanted to defend myself. She said the amount of the money did not matter to her. And the money was just a bonus. I didn't buy that for a second. I think she was motivated by money. I also believe her. I believe her account, but I don't believe that money was not the primary factor. And I think that was the place where Susan should have really just focused on that evasion from her on this point and really hammered it home. Actually, she's not so credible because she's not even admitting this basic point. I'm just curious if that stood out to anybody else.
Yeah, but
me, yeah.
But
I'm paying for this microphone, Mr. Green. Anyone remember that reference?
Oh yeah, Ronald Reagan, 1980, New Hampshire.
I totally agree. That was the best avenue. I wish I'd thought of it earlier, but I wanted to say, yeah, I mean, that's where I think Stormy came off the least credible, is denying what everybody in the room obviously knows. I mean, everyone in the room believes they had sex. Nobody in the room thinks she wasn't in this for the money. I mean, you don't go on the Make America Horny Again tour. A tour is something to make money, and it was obviously based on her fame or infamy due to Donald Trump. And it's so painfully obvious. And I think they could have focused on that rather than, did you have dinner or didn't you have dinner? Did you walk to the hotel or didn't you walk to the hotel? And I'll just say this finally. Again, I sympathize. When you're writing out a cross, when you're preparing a cross-examination, you think every little inconsistency is this holy nugget that you're going to have this Perry Mason moment in court. And sometimes you get too into it. And I'm sure Susan Nichols thought, I'm going to get her on the walk to the hotel or ride to the hotel, or had dinner or didn't have dinner. And sometimes those little details fall flat. They should have focused on the big picture, which is she was in this for the money. I totally agree with Kristy.
Look, the answer, I think, to all three of these very good points is the colossal blunder that they've either made or forced on them in the opening, that the flat denial of having had sex, which is where all the stakes are. Because I agree, there were credibility issues there. There was also a whole problem with her trying to say, did they have dinner or didn't they? And an inconsistency in 2011. That could have mattered depending on what they were using her for. But if they find, the jury finds, that the encounter happened, that I think, because of how the defense has played it or been forced to play it, is a near burial for Trump, or a very bad way to start deliberations. Okay, I want to talk about one more. There's so much we could talk about this week, but one witness who struck me as really interesting in a couple ways, Madeline Westerhout, sort of scheduler at the White House who was new to him. So let me start with you, Danny, even though we just ended, because it seemed to me she became almost a defense witness de facto. Did you agree? Was that Trump's best moment at trial was so far?
Yes and no. I thought she started off a good prosecution witness, and then there was a lot of stuff that was good for Trump. I thought she was an excellent witness overall. I mean, I think whatever she said, the jury was going to believe. She came off as eminently credible. So, yes, at the end, I can't say that she was a net benefit for Trump. There was bad stuff that the people got out of her against Trump, but there was also some good stuff. A moment, I don't know if you also caught it, but there was a moment, and I had some sympathy for Susan Nichols at the very end. She asked a question and got a great answer. She should have sat down. I've done this a million times. She asked the next question, and it didn't go so well. And I'm paraphrasing, but it went like this. The answer to her second to last question, I believe her penultimate question, was the answer she got was Donald Trump was really worried about how this would affect his family. Brilliant. Done. Stop. But she did what I do, which is try to get one more better question in. And she asked something to the effect of, you remember him telling you that? And then it deflates when Westerhout says, and this was her last question on cross, something to the effect of, yeah, I don't remember a specific conversation. It was just a general feeling. I mean, the question before and answer was great. And then, deflating on the last one. It wasn't such a great question. I wonder if anyone else caught that.
Well, yeah. And also she had a one question recross, which was to try to salvage just that. He loved Melania, right? No further questions.
Yeah. Listen, I've been there a bajillion times. I sympathize, but I noticed that and I just, yeah, that's a tough spot. Everyone does it. And she did it. She asked the extra question.
So I know she came across really well, definitely helped Trump some, but for those scoring at home, this has nothing to do with the case because the jury's not going to hear it. But, she talked about the mistake in general terms that she got fired for. The mistake was she got drunk, had dinner with reporters, and she said that Trump wouldn't be able to pick out his daughter Tiffany out of a lineup. And that she was in many ways closer to the president than even Ivanka was.
Oopsie.
And people who follow Trump know that Melania doesn't even actually spend very much time with him. She spent a lot of the presidency with her parents in Maryland rather than at the White House. And, this is all a make-believe on some level. That's not relevant, but just for context for people. And the other thing is the point of all of that, and she cries when she talks about Trump and how much she admires him. The point of all of that is to say that he was motivated by trying to protect Melania. And, Hope Hicks talked about this as well. So this is a very important thing for the defense to establish, because if he was motivated by the upcoming election, that is more incriminating. The problem that he is going to have on that family first defense, which is what they're building toward, is that Michael Cohen is going to testify, and there's already been some corroboration for this, that Trump tried to stiff Stormy Daniels. And he said to Cohen, we don't have to pay. Remember all the text chains about how Keith Davidson, Stormy's lawyer, keeps saying, where's the money? Show me the money. Where's the money? They're about to pull the plug on the whole deal. We saw more of this between Davidson and Stormy's agent, Gina Rodriguez, just a couple of days ago. Where's the money? The deal's going to fall through. The reason that they were delaying is that Trump said, stall until after the election. And if it comes out after the election, I don't give a shit. He was just trying to get past the election. And if Melania's feelings had been his first priority, he wouldn't have said it doesn't matter so much if it comes out after the election.
Agreed. I'll just say in general, I found, but it's knowing that other detail, I found her not so credible. I found that she was really, really trying to be unctuous and repair bridges to him. But I think the jury, not knowing the backdrop, might feel very differently.
I felt the same way, Harry. I thought you can't ask a question on direct about, does he care about the details? Does he pay attention to the details? Yes. Does he review documents before signing them? Yes. Did you see him sign checks? Yes. And actually, he would call Alan Weisselberg or the Trump Organization for clarification on checks. He was paying attention. And then the next day, you are asked the very same questions on cross, and all of a sudden, he's signing documents without reading them. And he's got people around him that he trusts to prepare documents, and he just signs them and is doing other things. It was a completely different story with basically the same line of questioning, and it just came across as she's not credible. Why? Because it came out that she met with the defense. She met with the defense for an hour. She prepped with them. And, it was very clear that she was trying to direct her answers to be favorable to the defense. She talked about her book, where she said Donald Trump was treated unfairly, and she wanted to make that story clear to the American people. She had mutual respect, and she was sort of really gushing over the relationship between Donald Trump and Melania. And she cried when she talked about losing her dream job. Like, all of this seemed to be to get back into Donald Trump's good graces. It was clear that her attorney was paid for by her boss. Well, who is her boss? And this was the mic drop moment on redirect for the prosecution. Her boss is Donald Trump's former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien. So I think the prosecutors made a good point that, yes, she's got some bias here. And I think that would have been clear to the jury. So her trying to back away from the good things that she gave to the state, I think it was very clear why she was doing that, and really not to be believed, because we've heard in Donald Trump's own words from all of these excerpts from his books that he is a micromanager, that he is somebody who cares about the details and, down to the penny. He's pinching pennies. Like, we've heard all of that. And we heard it also from Jeff McConney and other Trump organization witnesses about the fact that Donald Trump was in the weeds, even when he went to the White House. So I don't think she was as helpful to the defense as they would have hoped, but they certainly took their shot with her.
And he does serve up exactly what Jon said to have at closing argument. It illustrates, I think, an important part of this case, which is the DA's got to play with the cards they're dealt, and many of those are Trump insiders. The only real infidel that they have is Michael Cohen. So I think that, Ronna Graff was not on very long, even though I'm sure she knows lots of stuff because of that. Westerhout turned out, they made a calculation, the bad would be worth the good. They haven't, we found out, kind of astonishingly, they haven't even tried to approach Weisselberg. There are people who are still cowed by or sucking up to Donald Trump. That's just an interesting tactical part.
Just as an aside, was anyone else freaked out that there was this much Trump work going on while he's in the White House? I mean, I don't think Jimmy Carter was signing invoices for peanut butter jars, back in the 70s. It's something that no one really was talking about, but it really freaked me out that, shouldn't you be worrying about the Middle East and not signing the water bill for Trump Tower? I mean, that really, really put me in a panic. But again, it's not an issue here. It's just, I'm not a lawyer, but I just want to point that out.
Very good.
Because you brought up Jimmy Carter, you gave me an opening.
There you go. You can't, oh my God. Anything about Jimmy Carter, you go to Jon Alter. Yeah.
So I just wrote the first, major biography of Jimmy Carter. And you're absolutely right. He put all his holdings in a blind trust when he became president. And that's what you should do. He was prevented by the terms of the blind trust from having any involvement at all with the Carter warehouse. And then when he left as president, he found out that his brother had driven it into bankruptcy.
He is president emoluments. All right, let's now shift gears to what I think got to be the most anticipated and pressure-filled witness that I can recall in a major trial. So Michael Cohen takes the stand on Monday. What does he need to do? What is we know all the things they're going to say on cross. Hell, they've said the DA has been beating him up in their own way, but it'll be a success for them if he does what? Anybody?
My take on him is that just because you don't like the chef doesn't mean you don't swallow the food. And as long as he doesn't spit in the soup or serve spoiled meat, he's going to be okay. The problem is he might, because, we just saw it on Friday.
What would it mean to spit in the soup?
Well, just kind of, he's testified well in the past and he's testified badly in the past. Sometimes he follows his attorney's instructions. Sometimes he doesn't. So right now, the prosecution is really annoyed at him because, as Josh Steinglass said on Friday, when they were talking to the judge, he has repeatedly, said it twice. We have repeatedly urged Michael Cohen to zip it and to stop talking before he testifies. And a couple of weeks ago, he did. And he announced, this is my last tweet. I'm not doing anything. And then, like Trump, who he took his cues from many, many years, he reoffends and he posts something with Trump in an orange jumpsuit. And he's rumored to be running for Congress. And And so this is a guy who is obviously central to this case, whose testimony has been painstakingly pre-corroborated. That's what the whole prosecution's...
That's the whole case has been, really, right?
That's the whole thing, is to pre-corroborate Michael Cohen. So they've done a good job at that. It's just a question of whether he fumbles the ball.
I agree. I think that piece of it is really tough. We've seen that when Donald Trump in the E. Jean Carroll case was defaming E. Jean Carroll during the trial, and that was brought forth to the jury, that, you know, we saw the result of that. The punitive damages skyrocketed as a result. Jurors don't like that. They don't like somebody who's kind of speaking at a school or, you know, or doing things during a trial that aren't showing that they're taking the process seriously. And so look for the moment during cross where, you know, they put up the picture of Michael Cohen in the shirt, you know, showing Donald Trump behind bars while the trial is happening. They're going to have one line of cross that this guy has got an axe to grind and he just wants to do anything he can to put Donald Trump in jail, and he'll say anything to do it. And, you know, that's Exhibit A now. So it's just stupid. And he's a lawyer. He knows better, but I don't know how focused he is on the result here. And, you know, he just, I think, can't help himself. But he really has to now because, as Jonathan pointed out, like, the prosecutors have said, well, look, we've asked him repeatedly, please stop talking. And now the judge has said, well, this is now a request from the bench. It's not an order, but it is a request from the bench to please stop talking. And by the way, if he doesn't, that will become an order, most likely. We saw that with Donald Trump. The judge had requested initially Donald Trump not to say anything, and then it became an order when he ignored it. So we may see Michael Cohen in the same boat here, where he is removed, you know, he is also subject to some kind of a gag order, or at least he is removed as a protected party from the gag order on Donald Trump. So I think he's just got to save his voice for the testimony on Monday.
Michael Cohen, in theory, as a former lawyer, should know to not make some of the same mistakes that someone like a Stormy Daniels does, which is understandable because she's not trained in the law. But yet I know that Michael Cohen on cross-examination is going to try to be too clever. He will also refuse to answer yes or no questions. And I think he's going to try and help himself. I think this is a rare instance in which he's not a classic cooperating witness under the control of the prosecution. And I think Michael Cohen sees this as not only an opportunity, but maybe his last marquee in the lights opportunity, at least for a while. I mean, he is the central figure in this trial and really probably not in any of the others. So I think for Michael Cohen, this is his moment. I think it's going to be chaos. I think he's going to fight with the lawyers. I think the prosecution is nervous about him, but also I think they have done, as Jonathan said, they've spent the entire case pre-butting the defense, building credibility around Michael Cohen for the inevitable attack. And I think to that extent, they've done a pretty good job. I mean, this case comes down to a whole lot of circumstantial evidence and evidence that the jury can draw inferences from. And then they're going to have that direct evidence, I expect, from Michael Cohen, where Michael Cohen is going to say, Colonel Jessup ordered the code red, that this was something that was a direct order. And we're going to hear a lot of that. And then the prosecution thinks that together with the documents and the circumstantial evidence and the evidence of Donald Trump being a micromanager, they can draw all that together. And it sort of shores up the holes in Michael Cohen's credibility. But really all he has to do, listen to the question, answer the question, and the prosecution, I think, would be pretty happy.
And they've met with him 25 times. And, you know, he comes with some very low expectations in the eyes of the jury. And I do want to follow up. You're right. His professional horizons or fortunes have been really narrowed. You know, from his own standpoint, he has to continue to be the sort of anti-Trump guy. But I'm going to take a contrarian view here. And not just from you three, but from everybody. Because, you know, we saw David Pecker. He's a rogue, but you can be overall credible. We saw Stormy Daniels. There were things I think we agreed she was obfuscating, but you can be overall credible. The thing about Michael Cohen, we've seen him now, and his story has changed terribly, and he has been guilty of different crimes, including the equivalent of perjury. But, you know, he's telling the truth now, and I think it comes through. The 12 might not agree, but I think he's got a sort of charm or something, or at least personality. And yes, it's very important, and hopefully he's smart enough to know not to let them get his goat. And that's the biggest risk. But I actually think that all the baggage he carries in, which God, they know about it, in advance, he will overcome if it just seems like he's telling the truth. And, my guess is that is how it will seem.
I agree totally with that, Harry, especially the expectations point. So far, even the prosecution has gone a long way to making him seem like a bad guy, like on direct of Keith Davidson. They drew out what a bad guy Cohen was and how much Davidson hated him. Then it was on cross that we found out that Davidson and Cohen were actually friends and in touch all the time, right? So what the prosecution is trying to do is give the jury a permission slip to hate the guy.
Or not trust the guy.
Not trust the guy, but believe what he says on this. And the expectations thing is key, because if he actually is disciplined, then the jury might go, he wasn't that bad. I was expecting him to be horrible.
Yeah, right.
And the reason I think that might happen is that a few months ago, I interviewed Michael Cohen on stage at Cooper Union in New York at an anti-Trump conference that the New Republic magazine had. And he was trashing Trump the whole interview. And it wasn't quite, Baron von Schützenpants, which he did after the trial opened, which was really a stupid thing for him to say, although it's now on liberal posters all over the place, calling Trump von Schützenpants. But in any event, so he's, very over the top for most of my interview, and the audience is loving it. And then I started to ask him about what he would testify to. And he clammed up. And he said, I've told my lawyers that I'm not going to get specific. It wasn't just about this case, because he was about to testify in another case at that point. And he said, I'm not going to tell you anything that I'm going to say on the stand. And that made me think that maybe, he does draw an important distinction.
All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we hop into the beer cooler to ask the question, to IPA or not IPA? The India Pale Ale has become synonymous with the word hoppy. And it's that hoppiness that's created a bittersweet relationship with IPAs that has divided beer lovers across the world into two categories. Those who love this style of the pale ale for its full flavored bite with flavors of lemon and pine needle, plus typically higher alcohol content. And then those who prefer a little less sharpness with each sip. So what gives IPAs that signature bite? Well, there's another abbreviation you should know, IBU, which stands for International Bitterness Units. The higher the IBU, the more bitter the beer. Luckily, at Total Wine & More, we carry an array of IPAs that offer up a huge range of hoppiness. We've all been bitten by a hoppy IPA in our past. Swing by your local Total Wine & More and let our guides find you an IPA that's more YOU. So find what you love and love what you find. Only at Total Wine & More. Cheers!
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine and More for today's A Spirited Debate. All right, we are almost out of time, but I want to end with this, beginning with you, Danny, which is what theory or narrative of reasonable doubt remains for Trump? The defense needs to offer a narrative, not just poke holes in the witness, surely when it comes to closing argument. So what remains for them to credibly present to the jury as a story, as an overall account that incorporates the reasonable doubt they need, given, the successes and possible lack of successes of the evidence that the DA has come forward with?
Yeah, the magic word in your question is remains, because as the trial progressed, I felt like that window kept narrowing and narrowing. And I think really the only defense left is really a combination of two. As for an alternate theory, it's that Michael Cohen went rogue. We already heard that word come out. I expect you're going to hear it again. Michael Cohen was acting on his own, of his own accord. There's no evidence of any involvement, direct involvement of Trump involving Davidson and Stormy Daniels, although we're going to get that testimony from Cohen when he testifies. They're just going to ask the jury to disbelieve him as not credible. So it's going to be, look, the reimbursement happened after he was in the presidency, after all this happened, after he's in the White House. They haven't proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump was involved, that he had the intent, that his fingerprints are on any of this. And then they're going to fall back to position 2, which is they haven't proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They're going to hit that one hard because there aren't a lot of options left in this case. So, I mean, look, it's pretty narrow. On these elements in this case, I think the prosecution's done a pretty good job, and they've really narrowed in advance what the defense can do here.
The problem with the going rogue theory is Hope Hicks's testimony, which we haven't talked about. And her tears watermarked, so to speak, this part of the testimony when Trump said to her in 2018, when the Wall Street Journal article revealed the Stormy Daniels encounter, he said, basically, Michael did this all on his own, quote, out of the kindness of his heart. And then the prosecutor asked a very smart question. Is that characteristic of Michael Cohen? And she said, no, he has no decency, nothing charitable about him. No chance he did this out of the kindness of his heart. It was like an et tu Brute, et tu Hopi moment. We don't know why she cried, but it happened shortly after that, after she betrayed President Trump, former President Trump. He's not the president, no matter how often the defense says it. She betrayed him because she said he was not credible on this question of Cohen going rogue. My only doubt about this is whether, and it's a matter of law, not fact, and I think the lawyers on the jury will remind the others about this, but this idea of all this being the advancement of another crime, as the statute on business records reads. And I've just been really surprised that we haven't heard more about possible tax fraud, campaign finance violations, or interference in an election. And I am probably wrong about this, but I have a very unconventional view of who the mystery witness is going to be next week. We've been told there are 2 witnesses and then the prosecution rests. One of them is Michael Cohen. Nobody knows who the other is. I think it's going to be an expert on the New York state law that bars interfering in an election. They've laid out those stakes that this is a case about that, not a hush money case just alone, but hush money in the interest and the advancement of interfering in an election. And I think we're going to hear about that, maybe to just put a button right on Michael Cohen's testimony and have that witness, who will appear only for a short time, be the final witness in this case.
I think it's very compelling as a theory because they think they may be all done by the end of next week. And they got to figure a long cross for Cohen. So that does seem to suggest a short final witness. Kristy, any thoughts on what narrative of reasonable doubt remains?
So Danny had a great quote earlier from A Few Good Men about the Colonel Jessup, did you order the code red? That's brilliant. And that's so, I think, dead on, because what I think the state here is going to say is, the only person, yes, there are documents that this payment happened, but the only person here that you're going to hear from who will say that it was Donald Trump that directed the payment is Michael Cohen. There is no other corroboration for him being the one to do that. And so you have to take the word of Michael Cohen, and you can't believe him because he's a liar. He's lied to Congress. He's lied to banks. He lied to the IRS. He lied to the judge in his guilty plea. He is a liar. You can't believe he's telling the truth now. So that is where I think the defense goes. They will say he went rogue because he made these payments because he thought he was going to get a position in the White House and he was trying to please Trump, but that he didn't raise any of this with Trump. The problem with that is it just defies common sense. You would have to believe, because we already heard from David Pecker, who said he communicated with Donald Trump about the Karen McDougal payment, that Donald Trump cared about that. When the Wall Street Journal article came out a few days before the election, kind of exposing that there was this payment that the National Enquirer had covered up, he testified, Donald Trump called him up and said, I thought you had this under control. He cared about it, and he cared about the timing before the election. We have that from Pecker. So now you would have to believe, if you're the jury, that after the Access Hollywood tape, when we've heard from Hope Hicks that the campaign is in a crisis, that the Stormy Daniels tape is coming up. We know Donald Trump knows about it because we have the recording with Donald Trump and Michael Cohen talking about it. And again, that was the Karen McDougal payment in that recording. But we know Donald Trump knows about these payments and that Michael Cohen is keeping him abreast of these stories from the Catch and Kill. We know that. So you have to then believe after Access Hollywood tape drops that Donald Trump wouldn't care about the details of making sure she was paid before the election, which again, after Access Hollywood, it mattered more, not less. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't think they will be successful with that theory, but that is, I think, where they will go with this.
All very good. And on that, by the way, another thing to mention is the writing by Weisselberg. At least he is in on it, the payment to Cohen. So it has to be somehow that the two of them are together, and Trump didn't order it. Seems so unlikely. The best I can make out is some combination of he did it for Melania. They have at least enough to argue there. And he was signing the checks, but he didn't know what they were about. But there was a pretty good tweet entered on Friday. All these things came in and they washed over you, but they're going to be big in summation, where he says that he's paying him a monthly retainer, which of course he isn't. So in general, I agree with Danny that, the big word is remains. They have pretty well closed things off. The one thing I can think of that Cohen carries alone will be the conversation that's in their statement of facts, the DA, where Trump orders Weisselberg and Cohen to go figure this out, and that's where the Weisselberg writing emerges. But you need a reason, it seems to me. All right, I think there's an end for now. This drops as Michael Cohen is about to take the stand. So like everyone else, we'll have a laser focus on it and be returning next week with more reports from the courtroom. Thank you so much to Danny, to Jon, and to Kristy for her first time out on Talking Feds. You were great. I hope you'll come back a lot. And talk to you soon. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Kristy, Danny, and Jon. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. You can follow us on Twitter at TalkingFedsPod, and you can look to see our latest offerings on Patreon. Talking Feds is still a completely independent production, so if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. You can now leave voicemails with your questions for me and our guests. Whether for Talking 5 or general questions about the inner workings of the legal system for our sidebar segments, all you have to do is call 727-279-5339 and leave a voice message. And you can still also email us your questions at questions@talkingfeds.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine, associate producer Meredith McCabe, sound engineering by Matt McCardle. Our research producer is Zeke Reed. Rosie Dawn Griffin and David Lieberman are our contributing writers, and production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu. Our music is, as ever, by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.